Before I start, I want to convey the very sad news of the passing of the former national president of the AIIA and a long-serving member of this branch, Alan Gingell, AO, this morning. It was only a couple of months ago that Alan engaged the DFAT secretary here in this very room in a conversation, which I think everyone found stimulating. I recall Alan saying at the time that he wanted to remain an active branch member after leaving his national AIIA duties. Well, sadly, that is not to be. And the branch conveys its deepest sympathy to his wife, Catherine, and to Alan's family at this time. Well, I've been doing some research on tonight's topic, Costa Rica, and come across some fun facts. Costa Rica's population, around 5 million, I believe, making it a bit smaller than New Zealand. Population in San Jose, the capital, 330,000 people, which makes it a bit smaller than Canberra in population terms. Costa Rica in 2019 produced 99.6% of its electricity from renewable sources and ran completely on renewables for 300 continuous days. Pioneer of ecotourism. Many tourists on the Camino de Costa Rica walking trail, which links the Atlantic and the Pacific. And Costa Rica abolished its military force in 1948. The previous military budget is now dedicated to providing healthcare services and education. Our speaker tonight, Ambassador Armando Vargas-Araya, will tell us about the hummingbird phenomenon and how it describes Costa Rica's actions and outlook on the world stage. As an aid, he has brought some copies of Pura Vida, Just for Life, which provides a comprehensive view by Australian and Costa Rican authors about Costa Rica's first 200 years as a sovereign nation. Now, the ambassador has been in Canberra for nearly 4 years and for only a few more weeks, unfortunately, and is widely known and respected in the diplomatic corps. He's a writer and historian and the author of 12 history books and 19 works on cultural issues that have been published in the Americas and Europe. Amongst other achievements, he was Costa Rica's first Minister for Communications. Before we start, let me remind our normal format for these meetings. The ambassador will speak for 20 minutes or so before we go to questions from participants in-house and from those online. Welcome. Using the Q&A function on Zoom. And we aim to finish around 7 p.m. So let me hand over to Ambassador Armando.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your very kind introduction. And of course, the Embassy of Costa Rica joins the Institute in lamenting the passing away of your former president, whom I met here not long ago. And the Embassy appreciates very much the presence of each one of you. We're most grateful, of course, for the support of the Australian Institute for International Affairs and its ACT branch in having us for this event. I would like to express a warm salute to Your Excellencies, heads of mission of Argentina, Peru, Ecuador, Guatemala, Cuba, and representatives of Laos and Palestine. And we are very honored by the presence here of Ambassador in Macconville, Chief of Protocol, and our main contact on the day-to-day affairs with DFAT. We are also pleased by the company of a select group of authors and collaborators of Pura Vida, the Australian perspectives on the bicentenary of Costa Rica. Mr. Noel Campbell, who is also our honorary consul in Sydney. Mr. David Fuentes, who is sitting there at the back. Marta Guzman and Salima Estefan, among others. Costa Rica, Australia, the hummingbird effect is the subject of some reflections I would like to share with you now. Why the hummingbird? Not for the sake of rareness, but rather out of a desire for emulation. The newspaper El País in Madrid published 3 years ago a report, Costa Rica, the Great Lesson of the Petit Hummingbird. And a photography artist, mi amigo John Weisman from Wollongong has twice visited our Emerald Republic to take pictures of these flying jewels. Some of his pictures are in the book. The iridescent hammer, as we call it also, was the emblem for the celebrations of our bicentenary of national independence. And a few weeks ago, PBS in the US premiered the TV documentary, The Hummingbird Effect, available for free in YouTube, and I will recommend it very much, The Hummingbird Effect. The paragraphs that follow are therefore like an allegory applicable to certain aspect of the soft power inherent to our position in the world. Each continent has its own distinctive avifauna. In Australia, 3 prodigious birds attract my attention as well as my wife Martita's attention. The southern cassowary that we very recently have seen in the rain tree forest. The Australian magpie that wakes up with its guttural song every morning, and that every year there are so many articles about the most dangerous animal in Australia. And then the sulfur-crested cockatoo, abundant in our Canberra backyard. Each one of these birds could figuratively be reflected in some features of your national character. But I think this is a delicate issue, and we better elucidate it on another occasion. The large hummingbird family, with over 330 species, is unique to the Western Hemisphere. There is only one bird here that resembles, but is not of the same family in Australia. There are 53 species distributed throughout Costa Rica's biological compact 51,100 square kilometers between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans at the center of the North and South American continents. 2 of these are endemic. The mangrove hummingbird on the Pacific coast and the coppery-headed emerald in the intermediate lands of the Caribbean region, an authentic gem of a clouds forest. The population, as you correctly say, 5,200,000, would like to believe that our country might stand up on the planet as a hummingbird, associated with life, love, beauty, joy, and freedom. Yes, especially freedom. The hummingbird is convincing proof that beauty and nobility are to be found not in having more, but in having just what is necessary. A symbol for accomplishing that which seems impossible, the miracle of joyful living within our own national circumstances. Awarded the coveted UN Champion of the Earth for its pioneering role in fighting climate change, protecting the environment, and upholding sustainable development, Costa Rica's foreign policy is based on the principles of respect of human rights, promotion of democracy, peace, disarmament, and defense of its sovereignty, plus economic development. With only 0.03% of the Earth's surface, the country possesses 6.7% of the Earth biodiversity, more than 500,000 species. The Osa Peninsula in the south of the Pacific coast is the most biologically intense place on Earth, according to National Geographic. As the hummingbird that co-evolves with flowers, Costa Rican civilization and culture has been forged through millennia in harmony with its environment, adapting easily and thriving on change, At the end of the 19th century, a national strategy to protect biodiversity was gradually adopted, which is constantly enlarged and strengthened. Today, terrestrial protected areas represent 28.42% of the continental strip, and 30% protected maritime zones are now part of the Eastern Tropical Pacific Marine Corridor, with Ecuador, Colombia, and Panama covering more than 500,000 square kilometers, the largest marine protected area in the world, while you have the largest of any country in the Great Coral Reef. In line with a blue diplomacy agenda, we have called for the elimination of single-use plastics, decarbonization, and the implementation of a precautionary extension for the start of seabed mining. And together with France, we will co-host the next United Nations Ocean Summit in 2025, with a previous meeting this coming year in Costa Rica. Recently, we have been on the front line of the successful drive for the UN recognition that everyone, everywhere, has the right to live in a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, as well as in agreeing on the 30 by 30 target, aiming to protect at least 30% of the planet's land and water by 2030. Aware of the limits of our national physical resources, Costa Rica's foreign policy aspires to resemble the hummingbird that influences many flowering kingdoms, pollinating and bringing together diverse nations. Political stability is arguably a major originality of Costa Rica. Democratic processes began to consolidate since 1889, with two brief interruptions in the 20th century. Our country is one of only 22 full democracies existing in the contemporary world. Australia, one of them, New Zealand, another one. The national strategy is now to truly develop a benevolent and balanced four-dimensional democracy: political, economic, social, and cultural. Last month, our government co-hosted the Summit for Democracy with Korea, the Netherlands, the US, and Zambia, with an emphasis on youth and democratic values. And we have launched the Alliance for Development in Democracy, together with Panama, Ecuador, and the Dominican Republic, to accelerate socioeconomic growth as a dimension of democracy. Our foreign ministry uses every multilateral platform to maintain a leading position in the defense and promotion of human rights. With the support of Australia, we are a member of the UN Human Rights Council, where Costa Rica has reaffirmed its commitment to the defense of the universality of human rights. Our human rights agenda underscores the needs to guarantee more and better opportunities for women and girls, minorities, rural and coastal dwellers. San Jose, the capital city, is the seat of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. We have made a case to international organizations and friendly nations for a new multidimensional cooperation approach with adequate resources to guarantee safe, orderly, and regular migration. In Costa Rica, today, immigrants represent 9% of the total population, the only country of net immigration in Latin America. If anyone wants to know more about immigration, we have here Ms. Alexandra Boni from the International Organization for Migrations, who was transferred from San Jose to Canberra. Proportionally, a hummingbird's brain makes 4.2% of its weight. That is the largest in any bird. It can keep a running tab of multiple aspects of its visits to at least 8 different flowers over the course of several days, displaying a type of memory once attributed solely to humans. And as we know, for democracy to be successful and prosperous, active, intelligent, and critical citizens, as the Hummingbird, are required. 9 months from today, we'll be marking 75 years of the abolition of militarism in Costa Rica, as you rightly mentioned. In this historical period, the national peace strategy has expanded and deepened with the adoption by law of neutrality vis-a-vis any armed conflict, the recognition of the right of each inhabitant to peace, the first country that has adopted by law the right to peace as a fundamental human right for all its inhabitants. And it has been used already with the Constitutional Tribunal, citizens complaining of attitudes and policies of the national government that goes against this right of every inhabitant in Costa Rica. And then we are in the process of implementation, a culture of peace and understanding. Other people run the risk of maintaining their armed forces. Costa Ricans dare not to have a permanent military establishment. We are satisfied with the benefits of the peace dividend. Funds that most states spend on the military, as you said, Costa Rica invests in education, health, housing, welfare, social innovation, zero military budget. How can that be possible? Well, anything that exists is possible. And it has existed already for 75 years. Strength through peace, not peace through strength, is the most powerful idea that Costa Rica has contributed to humanity. Our foreign policy seeks to leverage domestic standards and experiences, both in the inter-American system as well as in the UN system. Costa Rica played a major role in the negotiations and the adoption of the Inter-American Democratic Charter, as well as of the Declaration of Multidimensional Security in the Americas. On top of the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in Latin America and the Caribbean, the Treaty of Tlatelolco, our foreign ministry strongly supported the proclamation of Latin America and the Caribbean as a zone of peace. And shoulder to shoulder with Australia and other like-minded nations, Costa Rica participated in the launching of the UN process that culminated in the Arms Trade Treaty. And more recently, our nation played a leading role in the negotiations that led to the approval of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, in which the present government of Australia has demonstrated an interest, sending an observer to the first meeting of parties in Vienna late last year, I think. Recently, Costa Rica has proposed a declaration of peace for the ocean. And last February, our foreign ministry led the regional conference on the social and humanitarian impact of autonomous weapons, where 33 states agreed on the urgency of negotiating a legally binding instrument with prohibitions and regulations regarding the autonomy in weapon systems to ensure meaningful human control. This is the first time that a conference on that issue has made outside of Geneva. It was in San Jose. And the UN University for Peace is based in our country. Existing without a military establishment does not compare to resting on a bed of roses. On the contrary, in these 75 years, 2 armed invasions from abroad were repelled by volunteer fighters organized by the government. Costa Rica resisted the enormous pressures of the regional hegemonic power to reestablish the armed forces in the context of the regular and scandalous war of the United States against Nicaragua. Our external defense is based on the national will, international law, and its multilateral institutions. And we consider that the firm entrenchment of human security in the population is essential. Like the agile and fast hummingbird, Costa Rica is very territorial, especially in the brave defense of its freedom and sovereignty. To sum up, these are the aspects of the hummingbird effect that I tried to apply here as an allegory to some of the principles of foreign policy in Costa Rica. Don't let perceived limitations hold you back. Know when to stand your ground. The hummingbird is the only bird that can fly backwards. Be efficient. Stay flexible. Show your true colors. And now, a few remarks about Pura Vida, Australian Perspectives on the Bicentenary of Costa Rica, the book. This book is an interdisciplinary collection of essays, narratives, and illustrations that gives a comprehensive vision of the development of Costa Rica in its 200-year trajectory as an independent state. Our republic has achieved a unique position as a demilitarized democracy. I know demilitarization is not the right word because countries are demilitarized by another power. It's not the case of Costa Rica, where it was a voluntary national decision, which is now in the Constitution. A country dedicated to the protection of its rich biodiversity and the development of the well-being of its inhabitants. This book dialogues with the Australian experience and points out various characteristic similarities of both societies. Official relations between Costa Rica and Australia were established 139 years ago, during which time the platform of shared attributes, values, and virtues has grown, paving the way for a prosperous future. Anyone who knows Costa Rica and Australia, as the former ambassador of Australia to Costa Rica just told me a few minutes ago, understands the expression Pura Vida, literally pure life. It is the briefest formulation of a philosophy of life, as festive as a hummingbird. And that is the origin of the book's title. The embassy brought off this project thanks to the goodwill of the participants. Our strong collaboration with the Australian National University made possible the academic sponsorship of the Australian National Centre for Latin American Studies, here represented by its director, Ambassador Noel Campbell. And the cordial ties with the publishing house of Costa Rica State University at a distance facilitated the agreement for this edition, accessible anywhere online. And the support of the Foreign Ministry, of course, has been crucial. The presentation of a book is a good reason for its author to rejoice. It's many times more so in the case of a collective work, the product of a laborious process carried out over 3 years by 23 Australian and 9 Costa Rican authors, amid the restrictions imposed by the worst global pandemic in modern history. Many other people and institutions have collaborated in the editing, illustration, design, proofreading, publication, and distribution process. Infinite thanks to those who have participated in this intellectual manifestation of fraternity between our two democracies. And I say this with a lot of hope, our two democracies of the Pacific Community of Nations. We can discuss that sometime, how the Pacific for Australia is just half, with only one edge on the Asia Asian side and not on the Latin American side, but that's another story. Let me highlight some of the attributes of the book. It's a multifaceted book written by Australian authors for Australian readers about a distant country. How many comparable works can be cited? Its title is bilingual, Spanish and English. It's the first book on Australia published in Costa Rica and one of the first in Latin America. It's a project of a diplomatic mission and its kind-hearted friends to establish a narrative covering 139 years of bilateral relations. Since the first honorary consul credentials were accepted by the then Governor General of the Crown Colony of New South Wales in Sydney. It's also an expression of optimism on the road ahead towards new stages of mutual prosperity and security by the strengthening of diplomacy, culture, the economy, personal interrelations, and also improvement of the soils, isn't it? That's one of the areas. It's a work that emerged within the framework of the celebrations of the bicentenary of free, independent, and sovereign existence of Costa Rica. It's an enticement for Australians to visit our Emerald Republic and experience our autochthonous way of life without a permanent army. And it's a book about peace, democracy, biodiversity, human well-being, and happiness. It's a pleasure to reaffirm here that at the end of this activity, each one of you may obtain a free copy of the book, courtesy of our Foreign Ministry and the Embassy of Costa Rica. And as I said, more copies are available online. And muchas gracias. Many thanks.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. We've got time for questions. I'll just ask people who are making questions to stand and identify themselves. Let me get the first question in, though. And you're saying that Australia and Costa Rica have a lot of cooperation in the multilateral sphere, in the United Nations and the World Trade Organization. So, but what are the characteristics? What are the similarities that bring the Australian magpie together with the Costa Rican hummingbird, for instance, to make that work?
Humanitarian international law, I would say. Costa Rica and Australia for 2 years are co-chairing the working group at the UN General Assembly that every year proposes a resolution to stop executions by governments. And there's not one here from that neighboring country, but we just read last week this week about something that happened in a country that in most other countries is not a crime. And yet one individual was hanged by the government of that democracy. So this year, last year, both Australia and Costa Rica, for the first time, worked together and managed to get the most votes in the history of that annual resolution at the General Assembly. At the COP conference on the Paris Agreement, we have worked on a number of things together. One of them was the participation, involvement of women and girls in all public policies that had to do with sustainable development. And Peru, Spain, Costa Rica, we all make presentations to the Foreign Ministry, and the decision was to support that position, and it went very well. We have been also working together, particularly since more recent times or months, into the climate change area. And there is a third one, or a fourth one, in which we are hopeful that with time and the adequate conditions, there might be an important investment of an Australian company in Costa Rica to produce green hydrogen for export to Europe, North America, and Asia. So those are a few. We are working very strongly with universities, academic centers, as we understand that the focus of the foreign policy of Australia is very restricted at the moment, with very limited resources for the Pacific and Southeast Australia, Asia. But yet we are working with other institutions of civil society, and we interpret academia and universities in that area, working on the development of the intelligence that I call, or intelligent diplomacy.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Now, questions? Yes, Rod.
Rod Holsgrave, a bit of background in international environment topics, but of course, Costa Rica, you mentioned its high biodiversity, and a lot of that area is protected area. And I believe some of that's been protected with support from other high-income countries like Norway. And there's been a lot of talk about that recently. Just recently, to the United States, Biden has pledged hundreds of millions of dollars to help protect the Amazon. And so there's an argument that the high-income countries should, in order to protect the whole planet's biodiversity in terms of climate change, should help lower-income countries protect the global biodiversity. And I just wonder if you'd like to make any comments on that, and whether Costa Rica, with other like-minded countries, could, in collaboration with Australia, could work in that area.
Yes, that's a very good question, and I appreciate it. Some 30 years ago, Costa Rica pioneered the concept of payment for environmental services. The forests of Costa Rica were being destroyed at a very high speed in order to grow cattle for export to the US to be used in hamburgers. It was not top quality beef that could compete with Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, or Australia, or even New Zealand. And at that moment, the idea came to do study and demonstrate to the farmers that it was in their interest to maintain, sustain the forest instead of destroying the forest, and that the government will pay to the farmer. And there was a study there in a relation. This is a 10-year agreement, 20-year agreement. So you, the farmer, will have, you know how much you will receive every year. While in the market, the prices will go up and down. And Costa Rica has been, up to today, the only developing country that has been able to reverse deforestation from 24.7%, the lowest coverage of forest in Costa Rica. We are now around 53 and growing. Now, in the process, we began to get assistance from private donors, eventually from international organizations, financial organizations, in a few cases with governments. Because when we speak of the ocean, we speak of ocean, not oceans. The ocean is one. And we speak of the environment and the forests. Yeah, there are many forests, but it's one reality. And of course, it's a matter of ecological justice, that those that became rich, developed by destroying nature, should be able to contribute, if not to pay, to other countries whose natural resources have been diminished. But this is something that is going on, is not very, it's going slowly, but it's making progress. And there is a lot of discussions about how to make an international agreement precisely in the direction that you have mentioned. Of course, Costa Rica will be very pleased to work with Australia and show what we did. Is that we are better. We're different. There are different ways of organizing a democratic society. And we're ready to share the experience that we have accumulated with other countries.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'm Desmond Woods. I'm a councillor of this branch. It's wonderful to have you here. Thank you for coming. I'm interested in the fact that you don't have a defense force. I'm interested in knowing whether you have a civil defense capability that is organized and ready for natural disasters. And I suppose a secondary question is, in protecting the biodiversity, how do you protect your sea area of economic importance to you and ensure that it is not preyed on by those who would be interested in taking advantage of the fact that you don't have a navy?
If there is one area in which we have to learn a lot, and we could learn from you, from the Australian experience, is how to control the adjacent waters, particularly in the Pacific, which is larger than on the Caribbean, the Atlantic. Costa Rica has a civilian police. There are no military degrees. There are nothing that had to do with the military establishment affects the civilian nature of the police force. In the electoral process, for example, when the Supreme Tribunal for Elections calls a process 6 months before the elections, the commander of the civilian police hands over the control of the police to the electoral authorities that put together a group of, they call delegates, civilian delegates, citizens that just wear a band here. And if any incident is registered anywhere in relation to the electoral process, it's for those citizens to call the police and order them to act, not the commander of the police. We have, of course, defense rangers in the national parks, some close to 30% of the territory now, and they are doing a good work. They need more and more resources, but we are getting there. In relation to the defense for an external aggression, as I said before, we trust on the will of the people, the will to defend themselves. We trust international law and the international institutions. Up to now, it has functioned with Costa Rica. We will see how long this voice of civilization or attempt of civilized coexistence will remain. Let's hope that it goes on and on.
Indeed. Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, please.
I'd just like to ask, please, if you don't have a standing army and you have full intestinal health, how has Costa Rica weathered the pandemic compared to richer nations?
My friend here, Noel Campbell, through the ANCLAS, the Australian National Center for Latin American Studies, put together a number of seminars on how Australia compared to a number of Latin American nations in terms of COVID-19. And my understanding, I attended most of the sessions, not all of them, was that Costa Rica didn't ended badly in comparison. We were the 7th nation where inoculations against the COVID began in Costa Rica because of the foreign ministry started to put together a group of people that deals with national emergencies. we have a very strong office for national emergencies, totally civilian. The foreign ministry worked with them and came up with a solution. And very early on, they were buying before and in advance enough vaccines for all the population. It went well, and we have in Costa Rica a system of public health that goes down to the level of a vicinity or a community of, for every 5,000 people, there is one clinic for primary treatment. But the first level is there, very close. A person like me over 65 will be visited thrice, maybe a year, by someone that will come and check on how I am doing, if I am having taken my pills, if I need something else for my health, etc. So they know intimately their population that they are covering. And that, as with the support of the population, the National Health Service has expanded all over through the country. And then there are regional hospitals and national hospitals and specialized hospitals, but those are the different levels.
Questions? Penny?
Excellency, thank you very much. I'm a fellow of the Institute and a member of this branch. Could you tell us a little more about Costa Rica's economy? And we know ecotourism is important, but what are the main exports and what are the main sources of the standard of living?
Very good. The first question I was asked at the DFAT, the first time I visited DFAT. At that time, Steve Baraclough was there dealing with Latin America. And that was the first question that I was asked. I thought Costa Rica is famous for coffee and soccer. But now tell me about this medical equipment that is the #1 line of import of Australia from Costa Rica. So I went on to explain that in the decade of the 80s, there was a change of the national strategy for development. For many, many years, it was agricultural exports only. And then came light industry, substitution of imports in the 60s. By the 80s, that was not good enough. So we went to open the economy totally and develop trade with many, many countries. There was a time, I have a Costa Rican economist here at the back of the room that could explain this much better than my attempt. But anyway, there was a time where we were exporting desserts, coffee, cocoa, bananas, to a handful of markets. Then we began to develop a little light industry, manufacturing, but not good enough. And we were exporting to Central America in that area. But then in the 80s, a change in the direction came with the strategy of development led by exports. And today, we have trade with more than 150 different markets. We are exporting more than 4,000 different products. #1 line of export is medical equipment. #2 is services, mostly in the IT sector. It's growing and growing. As you said, ecotourism represents, depends on who you talk, from 8 to 14% of the GDP. And there are now new opportunities on renewables, which is nothing that started today. For us to reach 99% of electricity from renewables, it started in 1949, when the government established an electricity, Costa Rican Electricity Institute, ICE, in English, HE. And HE began to develop seriously hydroelectricity. But today we have wind, we have solar, of course, hydro, and we have also from the volcanoes, we have geothermal. And next step, green hydrogen. We have a pilot project in Costa Rica that started 10 years ago. The first pilot project for green hydrogen in Latin America. And we're moving ahead in that direction. And we have free trade agreements with North America, with Europe, with China, with many other nations. A totally open economy. For good and bad, but open.
Ambassador, you mentioned during the presentation about interference from a regional hegemon, and I think we probably know who that is, but maybe you could tell us a little bit about how the lessons that the hummingbird has learned in dealing with the eagle. And whether there are lessons for other countries in dealing with powerful neighbors.
I remember when President Reagan came to visit President Monge in Costa Rica in 1983-84. And I was part of a team that was working on pre-preparation of the visit. And a good number of people participated. And there was a group to draft speeches and statements, etc. And he welcomed President Reagan, who at that time, from the, it's public knowledge, from the basement of the White House, they were waging this undeclared war against the Sandinistas in Nicaragua, the so-called Iran-Contras that became known as that. And he said, Costa Rica welcomes you because we're friends with the US, because we admire the US, because we like your democracy, because we would like to be like you are in many respects. And at this station in history, this moment when we meet here, you can count on Costa Rica's decided support for any positive action in Central America. We are friends. We cooperate in many respects. You have your own interests, national interests. We have our own national interests. And we respect the differences. But on any positive thing you will do, we will cooperate. I was present. I remember when in Lima, Peru, Ambassador Kirkpatrick, who was the ambassador to the UN, and she was a member of the National Security Council with Mr. Reagan administration. And she talked about Costa Rica on 3 different occasions. But in Lima, he said, Costa Rica cannot go on fence sitting when around Costa Rica, everything is in flames. Costa Rica is not a true state until it reestablishes its army, its military. And that is public record. The then president of Costa Rica, Rodrigo Carazo, wrote 2 or 3 letters to the ambassador, American ambassador. Say, no. It's not arms what we need. It's technical assistance, it's markets for our products. That is what we need to develop. We don't get, we cannot get involved in wars that exist because of the interest of others. And the true situation was the 2 superpowers at the very end of the Cold War, Central America was the last hot spot. They were putting the armaments in Central America, the soldiers that were fighting against each other and the dead. So at that moment, Central America was a problem for Costa Rica, but Costa Rica was not a part of the Central American problem. I remember once when President Monge received the commander of the Southcom that at that time was still in Panama and not in Miami. And he came with 2 or 3 assistants at the request of President Reagan. They had a one-to-one meeting, and he showed maps, diagrams, pictures, satellite, all type of intelligence. From Nicaragua, they are preparing an invasion to Costa Rica in order to make the conflict an international conflict. And the president listened to this gentleman and asked many questions. And he was offering to establish a base like the one they established in Honduras, in Palmerola, a military base. In Costa Rica, in Canalete de Upala. That's the name of a little town. And he was speaking about the value of the tanks that it will bring to defend Costa Rica, etc. And at one moment, the president told the general, I would like to put a hypothetical condition in case we would say yes, that all military equipment that enters Costa Rica will be the property of the government of Costa Rica. How come you cannot pay for a piece to repair an airplane or a tank? And then he laughs and said, precisely. You know, you're going to bring, how many tanks you said? Dozens of tanks. All right. If these tanks are as valuable as you say they are, and Costa Rica own the tanks, we will sell 1 or 2. And with that, we will have enough to build a fantastic area zone of full development on the border of Costa Rica and Nicaragua, with schools, hospitals, electricity, telephony, industry, highways, etc., that no one will aspire to have a different regime than the one democratic system that really works. At that moment, the general understood that there was no way, so he rolled up his maps and left. I have written that. It's already in books. So this is not something that I just made here.
Okay, we've got time for 1 or 2 more questions. Yes, thank you.
Hi, thank you for your opening statement. It was very insightful. This question isn't exactly pertinent to it, but we'd be very interested to get your response. Like many of his Latin American neighbors, Costa Rica's state religion is Roman Catholicism. I was wondering, how does it play into the Hummingbird vision, if at all, or the broader vision of Costa Rica in general?
Catholicism.
Roman
Catholic
faith.
Ah.
How does it play into the
Yes.
worldview of Costa Rica?
Costa Rica has been, Costa Rica is an exception. I think it's the only state in the world that has an official religion, Catholicism, inherited from the Cadiz constitutions of 1814 and all other constitutions that followed. And yet, the Catholic Church in Costa Rica is, at one time it was 95, 97% of the population. Today, maybe 35%. Pentecostalism has grown a lot. And other churches. And also these, there are a substantial number of Costa Ricans that do not confess any religion. I would say thirds, a third of Catholics, a third of evangelicals, and a third of those that do not worry about that. A few years ago, the identity of a Costa Rican, you will ask, who are you? And he will tell you, I am Catholic. Saprissa is my soccer team. And Liberación Nacional is my political party. Calderonismo is my political party. Not anymore. 55%, 57% of the people now do not align or appear or confess that they are members of a political party. So that is the crisis of the political parties. In soccer, it's very weak now, the adherence of people to one team or the other. Not like Argentina, for example, that even in India and Bangladesh have followers. And in terms of religion, as I mentioned before. So everything is in flux. I know that this is not specific for Costa Rica, this is very general. But on the other hand, around 7-8%, I mean 70 or 80%, 7 or 8 of 10, will say that Costa Rica is democracy, biodiversity, and peace, non-military. Those are stronger identity marks of the Costa Rican character than soccer, religion, or political affiliation, as in the past.
I think there was a question over here, wasn't there? Yes, please.
My name is Sam Renst, and my question is, what can Costa Rica teach Australia to leave a better world to us kids?
Costa Rica does not teach us anyone else what to do. No. We would like our experience to be better known. And that is why, for example, we try to produce this book, Pura Vida, Costa Rica, Australian Perspectives on Costa Rica. Because as I said before, Costa Rica is not better than any other country. Might be different because as happens with children in your school, you can see one way, the other one different way, etc. A lot depends on their parents and their environment, their ambience. And Costa Rica has been fortunate to be small enough not to be not to raise ambitions of others to dominate it. We are fortunate not to have the type of natural resources that you have here. Mining doesn't exist. If we had a coal, for example, God forbid, what would be the situation of Costa Rica today? But we don't have that. So the Costa Rica case is how to develop within your own means, following the instincts that passes from one generation to the next generation. And do not be afraid of who you are. Stand up and affirm yourself. Even if it's Mr. Reagan talking to Mr. Monge. I will tell you just one more story. Mr. Monge, in '82, he went to visit, he was elected, and then he went to California after the election. And someone, a lawyer, arranged a meeting for him and Mr. Kissinger, who had just had his heart operation, open heart operation. And he was resting in, recovering in a place in the Sonora Desert, close to LA. Indian Wells, I think it's called, the place. And I was there because I was the translator for Mr. Monge and Mr. Kissinger. So they went for the first conversation. This was early '82. And Mr. Kissinger welcomes President-elect Monge, etc., and says, let's say tomorrow you were appointed with the support, the mighty support of the United States, dictator of Central America. What would you do? And then he told me, ask him to repeat the question because I have to think what I want to. So I asked him to repeat the question. And he said, your premises denote that you do not understand the Costa Rican character. Costa Rica will never get its hands into the internal affairs of its neighbors. Whenever that has been, we try to do that, we burn our hands. So no more of that. We are neutral. But number two, God willing, and with the will of the people, I might be able, with difficulty, conduct the government during this very difficult period of financial difficulties and security issues with the war around the corner. And I cannot imagine myself that I will be making one decision that will affect another country. If you want, we can restart the conversation, but under different premises. And then Mr. Kissinger told him, this is written in the book also. And he said, well, the problem with you Latin Americans is that in private, you come and talk to me and tell me things, but in public, you refuse to sustain the same views. And the other difficulty I have is that when I want to talk to Latin America, which number shall I dial? What is the number for me to talk to Latin America? You're not cohesive enough as a force. And that was that conversation. Anyway.
All right. Well, we might leave it there for this evening, and I'd like to, on behalf of the ACT branch, thank Ambassador Armando for a very informative, if not to say bird's eye view of Costa Rica's worldview, and indeed to wish you very much the best wishes back on your return to your home country, and the hope that you can return to Canberra, return to Australia in the near future. On everyone's behalf, please join me in thanking you.